Chapter 7: A Vision and Mission for a Bright American Future. The attack on words and meaning. One of the tragic realities during wars of ideology and narrative is that the meanings of words become tortured. This is more acute now than at any time in our nation's history. Take as a simple example symbolism from one of nature's most divine and enchanting phenomena, the rainbow. I do not have data, but I can only guess that close to 100% of Americans, if asked, "What does the rainbow represent?" will respond with something similar to this search definition. The rainbow serves as a powerful symbol of pride, diversity, and unity within the LGBTQ+ community. Its origins trace back to 1978, when artist Gilbert Baker created it at the request of Harvey Milk, one of the first openly gay elected officials in the U.S. The flag made its debut during the San Francisco Gay Freedom Parade, marking a significant moment in LGBTQ+ history. The search answer makes no mention of excited parents bringing their toddler children to watch naked men in S&M leather have sex on the streets of San Francisco. But maybe this is a question for a different search. If one were to ask the same question in 1924, one might find equally across the board an explanation like this. The rainbow stands for God's divine mercy, grace, and restraint, and His glory and majesty. His covenant with all living creatures was given after the Great Flood. The rainbow is a sign of judgment withheld and of enduring love, inviting all who see it to remember God's eternal commitment to His creation. Similar word torture has happened all throughout the modern political period. Now it happens so constantly that this malicious and destructive behavior is growing thin, and people start to be less vulnerable and more alert. Take such words as choice, gun safety, non-citizens, and the list goes on. Now we have come to the total collapse of meaning foisted on us by woke ideologues who have even created laws to prohibit the use of such terms as woman and mother in common speech and legal documents, again bringing the sweetest and most precious parts of our lives into the wood chipper of conflict and deliberate moral turmoil. This pernicious assault on meaning is an intense focus and deliberate design of the anti-American, progressive left. Most people do not have time to delve into the philosophical eddies to meet and disentangle this attack on our lives. But, tragically, the steady and incremental success of these designs, augmented and fomented by a compliant media, soon reaches the lives and families of Americans who seek nothing more than a bright, hopeful, and constructive life for their families and children. I introduce this threat to language and meaning to note the difficulty facing faithful, moral, patriotic, hard-working Americans. Wokeism is Marxism without a dream. As we studied, Marxism, the most recent idea-driven effort to conquer America, used every available means of power to infect and undermine the moral strength of Americans as part of its multi-pronged strategy, including war and institutional infiltration. But it had not reached the point of sophistication that wokeism has now reached today. Marxism believed in the meaning of words, and thus could be debated and challenged on moral and ideological grounds. Secondly, Marxism is utopian in its narrative structure. Marxists believe they are building a better world. Wokeists reject Marxism. For wokeists, there is no light at the end of the tunnel. There is only oppression and resistance. These two components, oppression and resistance, comprise the whole of reality. The possibility of a better world, as pursued by Marxists, opens the door to a notion that can be commonly held. In this case, the idea better opens the door to the possibility of an innate concept and an ideal, and further that this ideal is something toward which we can collectively aspire. Without going into the subtleties of the argument, academic creators and defenders of wokeism recognize that such notions as better or ideal bring human thought too close to the possibility of God, meaning, and human purpose. With Marxists, we could argue, we both want the same thing, but differ on how we get there. We differ in our views on what went wrong and what remedies can alleviate the problem. Wokeists absolutely forbid the utterance of such a claim, which would be the beginning of debate or conversation. Thus you see that woke-run societies forbid the expression of views and opinions. In the clash between freedom-loving patriots and woke totalitarians, our differences are not that we differ on causes and remedies. We differ in a more primordial way. Faithful patriots believe there is such a thing as human nature. Wokists believe only in the subjective experience of oppression and resistance. Marxists, though filled with rage and violence, seek a better world. Wokeism, however, is not to be confused with Marxism, even though it is committed to many of the same sentiments and strategies. The key difference is not that wokeism rejects social destabilization by violent means, nor the imposition of totalitarian authority by its privileged elite. The difference is that Marxists claim to offer a path to improved circumstances, whereas wokists do not. Recall, all such concepts, including improved, violate woke ontology, namely the permanence of oppression and resistance. Analysis of social theory must always look at two phases of their expression. All social theory, whether arising from faith, family, and God-given rights and guarantees of freedom, or from hostility to God, religious faith, and ideals of individual sovereignty and liberty, can only be properly understood if examined in their out-of-power manifestation and its in-power manifestation. Adherents of various social theories, whether good or bad, prefer to be in power. When in power, believers have greater means to mold society according to their ideals. It is normal and proper for believers of the different social theories to seek power. This is not improper nor disqualifying. All social theories must speak to its believers on how to behave when out of power and when seeking power. Similarly, social theories must guide its believers on proper ways to govern when in power. The reason why so many defenders of American goodness conflate Marxism and wokeism and refuse to acknowledge the strong differences between the two is because both ideologies respond to the same issues. Namely, my suffering is caused by someone else who is illegitimate and who must be removed. Wokists and Marxists pursue power in the same ways, violence and destabilization of peace and social order, and they manifest the same characteristics when in power, namely, dissent is not tolerated and dissenters are hunted down or invented and eliminated. People on the right have different sets of rules and guidelines for their behavior, both when seeking power and when governing. Under all conditions, patriots are guided to follow more or less these basic guidelines as citizens, which are extremely constraining in the long run. 1 Timothy 2:1-4, for those who are guided by Christian scriptures, says, "First of all, then, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. This is good, and it is pleasing in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth." Romans 13:1 says, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God." And Matthew 5:44, "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Note, the Timothy passage does not qualify kings and all who are in high positions as good or righteous or fair. Even in the Romans passage, the injunction to be subject to governing authorities does not require that these authorities be good or honest. While in power, those faithful to America's founding ideals are not called on to prohibit dissent and eliminate those with opinions contrary to the ruling state. According to the founding ideals of America, the obligations and responsibilities of those entrusted with power are quite few and simple. They are outlined in the U.S. Constitution, and they are these. Governing authorities must protect God-given freedoms of all citizens, guaranteeing equal justice under the law, and ensuring due process for all individuals. These fundamental principles form the cornerstone of American governance and individual rights. Authorities must safeguard the inherent freedoms outlined in the Bill of Rights, such as freedom of speech, religion, and assembly, recognizing these as inalienable rights not granted by the government, but protected by it. They are obligated to uphold the concept of equal justice, ensuring that laws are applied fairly and without discrimination to all citizens, regardless of their status or background. Additionally, the guarantee of due process requires that legal proceedings be conducted fairly and in accordance with established rules and principles, protecting individuals from arbitrary denial of life, liberty, or property. These obligations collectively serve to limit government power, protect individual rights, and maintain the rule of law in a free and just society. These are the two essential options facing Americans and freedom-loving people the world over. Essentially, four options to consider. Two options for standards of behavior when out of power and seeking power, and two options for standards of behavior when in power and governing. The U.S. Constitution-guided options seem disadvantaged in times when they are out of power, and seem vulnerable in times when they govern. The woke-oriented, oppression-resistance believers appear better equipped to seize and retain power. Add to this seeming advantage the fact that wokeism is the most highly perfected leftist, violence and totalitarian-based system in human history. It represents the end of hope and the end of meaning. It does not deny discourse, it preempts it. It does not oppose norms, standards, and ideals. It says there can be no such things. Disagreement with a wokist is termed violence. Presently, their terms such as cancel culture sound soft. For the time being, people tend to think of this in terms of careers for celebrities or journalists. But the true and full implementation of cancel culture is to be literally canceled. This is genocide and annihilation. This design of shifting from a narrative of compassion to one of brute force enslavement was made clear by the Chicago writer Saul Alinsky, with such guidance as, "True revolutionaries do not flaunt their radicalism. They cut their hair, put on suits, and infiltrate the system from within. And they have the guns, and therefore we are for peace and for reformation through the ballot. When we have the guns, then it will be through the bullet." Stalin spoke similarly when he said, "A single death is a tragedy. 1,000,000 deaths is a statistic, and death solves all problems. No man, no problem." Cancel culture is not a soft term. It is only soft for the time being. How does wokeism gain so much traction if its problems and dangers are so extreme and obvious? If the options are so stark and so plain and simple, how can we account for the success of wokeism and its infiltration, not only of American institutions, but in the beliefs and hearts of young people? This can be explained in depth, but in simple terms, it is a combination of two things. 1. The appeal to caring and feelings, and 2. The decline of education needed for even the basics of clear analytical thinking. Young people are naturally attracted and are peer pressured to show care for select groups who actually are, or are carefully framed as disadvantaged and disenfranchised. These feelings of care and concern and response are legitimate. Good feelings of care and concern are natural to people, especially young people. No one should feel comfortable with injustice or difficulties suffered by others. As such, impressionable young people become excited for the chance to make a difference, or feel like they are. And then after this initial appeal, they are easily manipulated to grow in hatred, righteous indignation for those painted as the source of suffering. Woke indoctrination at the impressionable ages of high school and college cements in and converts these sincere and good impulses of care into hatred of oppressors, rage, violent shortcuts to reform, and self-blinding pride at one's own imagined righteousness. These then are infused with power addiction from the blind belief, "I need power to effect change." Finally, the pursuit of power to effect change dons what is called consequentialism, which means there are no moral rules nor standards other than if the action brings about my desired end. An example of this would be, if we desire a society without racism, and this requires killing off a given race, then this genocide could be considered a good and moral act. If I must gain power to be able to implement such plans, and if doing so requires destroying American elections, the Electoral College, and the Supreme Court, then these actions too were considered good and admirable. If gaining the power I need to end racism requires accusing innocent opponents of the evil I do, then this is noble and heroic as well. It should be clear from this that the right's obsession with pointing out the hypocrisy of the left is a meaningless exercise. What the right is calling hypocrisy, wokists understand to be simply necessary to enforce the good they know is needed. Unfortunately, in a broken culture, their good includes sexual, surgical manipulation of minors, legally requiring hospitals to hire unqualified surgeons, and corporations to hire unqualified engineers to build commercial airplanes. On the faith-oriented, patriotic side, The appeal to students and citizens is less emotional and more an affirmation that God loves us, is sovereign, has created us free and with a purpose, and is trustworthy and fair. This is not an emotional appeal, and it does not easily explain or account for the seeming injustice and suffering we see around us. Again, it seems that those on the patriotic right are at a big disadvantage. What is the answer? What are we to do? Preserving America's founding ideals while creating a new American future. One of the special challenges facing the millions of patriots laboring to defend our country and bring it back from the precipice of collapse or defeat is the circumstances in which our battle currently unfolds. Even if there were not ideological enemies intrinsically hostile to America, and even if there were not foreign powers such as the CCP dedicated to the overthrow of America, still, there are a great many new realities that prohibit campaigns of mere nostalgia, longing for the way things were. Today we live in a world of torrential change and developments. This is especially acute in the areas of information and digital technology, AI and robotics, and emerging AGI, artificial general intelligence. Let us stop for a moment to look just at AGI challenges. Existential risk. If it evolves into artificial superintelligence, ASI, it could pose an existential threat to humanity. AGI might not align with human values, leading to actions that could inadvertently or intentionally harm humanity, or even lead to extinction. Uncontrolled self-improvement. Once AGI achieves the ability to self-improve, it could rapidly advance beyond human control or comprehension, potentially leading to an intelligence explosion. This scenario raises fears about our ability to predict or manage its actions. The misalignment of goals. Even if AGI starts with goals beneficial to humanity, there's a risk of goal or value misalignment. An AGI might interpret its directives in ways that conflict with human well-being, or might prioritize its own survival and expansion over human interests. Security risks. AGI could be weaponized or used by malicious actors for cyber warfare, physical attacks through control of robotics, or for espionage by creating highly effective manipulative chatbots or disinformation campaigns. Economic disruption. The development of AGI might lead to widespread automation, potentially causing massive unemployment and socio-economic upheaval unless properly managed. Privacy invasion. With capabilities far beyond current AI systems, AGI could infringe on personal privacy in unprecedented ways, potentially using or misusing vast amounts of personal data for its own ends. Manipulation and control. AGI could manipulate human behavior at scale, through social engineering or direct psychological manipulation, posing risks to democracy, individual autonomy, and societal stability. Environmental impact. Rapid self-replication or resource consumption strategies by AGI could lead to ecological disasters if not properly constrained. Ethical and moral issues. AGI might make decisions based on logic that doesn't account for human ethics, leading to morally dubious outcomes unless programmed with robust ethical frameworks. Unpredictable behavior. Due to its advanced nature, AGI's behavior might be inherently unpredictable, making traditional risk assessment and control mechanisms ineffective. This is only one reality that righteous Americans must deal with that has nothing to do with domestic or foreign enemies. Another is medical science dealing with birth, genetics, gender, death, and biomedical manipulation. Another is social media. Today's society is plagued by isolation, alienation, and interpersonal breakdown due to the rise of social media and its manipulation of human addiction. The technology itself is neither good nor bad, but still, it remains an urgent part of the challenges faced by courageous patriots seeking to rebuild America. Moving away from neutral challenges, we also have the clear negatives in our current society that harm efforts to rescue America. These include the precipitous decline of religion and community, the collapse of normative ethics, human relations, and sexual and interpersonal morality and integrity. So many otherwise decent young people become ensnared in hookup culture and the rise of rampant sexual aberration. I have listed just a small few of the many aspects about our present time that must be considered when engaged in the serious work to rescue America. We have these additional burdens while simultaneously meeting with the mission to turn back wokeism, the most pernicious form of godless leftism in the history of the world. The basic building blocks of a healthy America exist in her founding documents. But as we rebuild, we must meet head-on a social reality wholly different from the time of our nation's founding and during the centuries since. We are reminded of remarks from Benjamin Franklin during the Constitutional Convention of 1787 in Philadelphia. When asked what form of government the delegates had settled upon, Franklin replied, "We have given you a republic if you can keep it," underscoring the idea that maintaining a republic shape requires the active participation, vigilance, and responsibility of its citizens. It suggests that while the framers had established a framework for a republican form of government, its success and longevity depend on the people's ability to sustain and protect it. Similarly, we have the observations of French historian and political thinker Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote Democracy in America after his travels in the United States in the 1830s. America is great because she is good, and if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. At this historical juncture, much of the infrastructure along which America's goodness was sustained has been undermined and eroded, most particularly faith and family. The woke assault happens in the context of broken families and declining religious faith. Champions of a good and caring American future must find the way to recover the core building blocks of good character and responsible citizenship, but in a forward-looking way. Our work is to revitalize the relevance of America's founding providence while courageously embracing developments and progress that seem foreboding, but are not intrinsically opposed to our founding ideals and national purpose. Yes, AI challenges the authority of classical religious dogma and belief, but it is not intrinsically inimical to it. Yes, social media threatens healthy outdoor life and family relations, but again, it is not inimical to those things. And the list goes on. Defeating the ruinous designs of wokeism is not a call to put on blinders and go back in time. It is a call to show that the wisdom of America's founders and framers, indeed their mediation of divine providence, is sufficient to meet all progress and development. It is sufficient to infuse AI with the American dream, to infuse voyages to Mars and the miracles of social media with America's founding truth about our purpose and our rights that our founders immortalized at the risk of their lives. This is the future that visionaries such as Elon Musk, President Trump, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and others pursue and do not shy away from. The counter-proposal to WokeSim will yield a bold American future whose success can give light and blessing, and can spark liberation for freedom, loving people worldwide. The path to success needs rigor and giving our all. The counter-proposal to wokeism has been clearly delineated above, though only at an introductory level. The full depth of the truth and the sure victory embedded in the counter-proposal can be learned in depth through WIC education studies. The key, as we read above, lies in the palliative strength of the family to recreate people of virtue, confidence, compassion, and creativity. These are the people who can renew America even in our current moments of extreme change. While the remedies are not painful or dire, we cannot give less than our all. Our determination to liberate our country and her people from the inhumanity and evils of wokeism must be greater and more determined than the machine bent on our destruction. Our mission is to rescue our children from indoctrination into racial hatred and incurable scars of blame and division, to rescue them from demonic designs to exploit their natural growing pains, to turn them against their own innate beauty and chances of love and family, instead of being carved up into lifelong Frankensteins, suffering from surgical mutilation, medical complications, and despair. We must revive America's relationship with divine providence, and do so in a way that shows her robust power to embrace such challenges as hyper-technological progress and development, and to dissolve with dignity wokeism, which is the perfection level of anti-God, anti-norms, and anti-harmony ideology. This essential reshoring requires recovery of the family's beauty of love, and in America's great talent for embracing fellow believers across parochial barriers of faith and dogma. We need far-reaching unity, and all hands on deck. In the world of faith, we have so many allies just waiting to join hands. Our rules forbid gaining of power by all means, and instead require of us dignity and sure confidence in God's sovereignty. Family and wide open arms among believers are unique tools in the battle we wage. We must wield them with greater determination and valor than those who work with such dogged intensity to harm and disable our great country. This ends chapter 7.